You all put the bar very high in your presentation. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you very much to Pamela and the whole Citizen of the World project for inviting me. It's very exciting for me to be here to talk about a very important subject, not only for Montessori, it's a very important subject for education in general. And when I got the subject, I read about what it meant for the project. And it was an interesting mix between cultural awareness and expression, self-expression, which I think it's a very interesting connection to make today. So in short, what I plan to do today first is to share my screen. So what I plan to do today is discuss this central idea that education and Montessori education, it's an invitation for children to understand themselves, but understand themselves as a part of a great story, a part of the great story of human history, human civilization, a story that connects people across time, space, and culture. So that's the idea. How do we do in elementary to help children to identify themselves as citizen of the world? So this subject that I'm going to talk about today, cultural awareness, is probably one of the easiest one to connect to the main title of the project, Citizen of the World. And why would cultural awareness be important today and at any time? We'll see how it nurtures empathy, how it helps with appreciation of the diversity, especially understanding diversity as being the expression of the same humanity, and the importance also for peace, which is a very, very important aim for Montessori in education. And it's also about giving children the tools to navigate a very complex and interconnected world. Today, the world is not anymore about the family and the tribe. Our tribe today is the whole world. We are dependent of each other, not only on the local level. Every day we consume products that comes from everywhere in the world, that exist because people and civilization everywhere in the world participated in the invention or the preparation of the invention. So one thing that we're going to see today is how do we help children through isolation of concept, not just like teaching, really by giving them keys. How do we help them raise their awareness of that universality of what it means to be a human? We're going to talk about fundamental human needs. We're going to talk about human tendencies and also human creative adaptation, that very special capacity of human beings to adapt themselves at the level of the individual. And also, we're going to talk about expression and how cultural awareness and the development of an identity that is connected to the world, how does that support an authentic expression? And when I mean authentic, means an expression that really comes from them, from their own personality, from their own person. And we're going to look at a couple of tools that we use in Montessori to support that self-expression, to support this expression to really be the expression of the individual and not just a mimic of another person, of a teacher, or someone that inspires them, something that really can come from them. So I will start with this, with a question for you to think about. So when was the last time you experienced cultural misunderstanding? Think about it. It can be you felt misunderstood or you misunderstood. So when is the last time you felt that? And how did that affect your experience? When I'm talking about experience, I'm talking about your experience of the relationship with the people, or also your own personal experience, whether it's on the intellectual level, physical level, or spiritual level. And with this in mind, we'll go through some aspects of Montessori, some practical tools that we use in elementary, and then at the end, we're going to try to connect it with that example that you have in your life. So to understand how we present the world and how we bring cultural awareness to children, first, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to explain the what she calls the cosmic perspective or the cosmic vision. So that's the perspective on the world, on the universe. And it's a perspective of interconnectedness. It's really the idea that everything in the universe is interdependent, meaning it's dependent on other agents in the cosmos, but the other agents also depend on them. Which is interesting when you think about it, because when she started talking about it, the science of ecosystems, for example, was quite limited at that time. But for her, it was already quite obvious that this idea of a world in a system, a world in a interdependent framework, was how we could bring the child to really understand the world. And it came from her understanding of the child, her observations, because she could observe that after the second plane, so around 5 and 6 years old, the child changes and they have new sensitivities, new characteristics. And you know about the reasoning mind, the sensitivities for social life, the moral sensitivity, the interest of the child for the acquisition of culture. And looking at all of that, then it was making sense to present the world as something that is a web of cosmic agents with interdependencies, with tasks that every agent has to do. Because then it served the reasoning mind. The reasoning mind was always asking why. So it's not enough to know a lot of things, know a lot of words, of vocabulary, lots of colors, of shapes, etc. That is very appealing to the first plane child. But for the second plane child, it's not anymore. So this child is very interested to this complex vision of the world that is the cosmic vision, the cosmic perspective. And that's one of the charts that we use, and where we see that both living and non-living elements of the universe are dependent on each other. So the interdependence is one thing, but also the idea of laws that have to be followed so that the system works. And everybody followed laws, including the sun and the mountains and the water. Every element is actually following the laws, whether it's the laws of physics, the laws of nature, of chemistry, but there are laws that have to be followed, because if the water decides not to evaporate anymore when it's warm, then we have a problem. The whole system isn't working anymore. And then animals and plants also follow their own laws, the laws of nature and the laws of their own species. And that perspective will influence also how we present human civilization, which means how we present culture. But that is the general framework that we're going to use. So every element in the system is important. Every element has laws to follow and have a task to accomplish. And that brings harmony in the whole. Not a fixed harmony. We all know that the world is always changing and has always been changing, but a harmony that is constantly in evolution. And that is the adaptation of the world. Throughout time, things are adapting, following their laws, and finding out what's their task to accomplish to create this harmony again. And by offering the children this preparation, this cosmic perspective on the world, then we allow them to situate themselves in time and in space. That is a very, very beginning of an identity of being part of the whole universe, being part of the whole world, not only of my family or my country, but really a citizen of the world. I understand that I am part of a very complex and beautiful system. And then, as you can see at the bottom, we also obviously talk about humanity and human civilization. We're going to talk about it in many ways. We talk about the history of humanity, but we talk also about the human civilization today. For example, in economy, local economy, global economy, all of that to again allow the child to understand the unity of the world, how everything in the world is dependent on each other, everything is interdependent, including in the human civilization. And Montessori says that. She says, the problem we have is not that the world is not united, because it is. We are already united. We are already one gigantic organism with a lot of exchanges, whether they are intellectual exchanges or actual product exchanges or services. But we are already united. And what she says that the problem is that we are not aware of it. And that awareness doesn't bring us to act as a united civilization. We believe there are borders. We believe there are nations. We believe that we have separations between cultures. And what we want to do in education in Montessori is bring another perspective on that. It's not about ignoring differences, but it's about looking at them through the lenses of the universality of what it means to be human. And then cultural awareness brings another perspective on life and on the world. Like every difference becomes the creative capacity of human beings to express themselves differently, depending on the environment where they are, depending on their history, but we want to help them identify our unity instead of identify differences. So when the child understands that they are part of the great unfolding story of life and that their work is meaningful within it, then they don't only find knowledge, they also find joy, identity, and peace. That is what we want. Not cultural knowledge, cultural awareness, and the feeling of belonging to much more than just my country and my culture. And again, that's why we start with the whole, with the big picture. We start with the very beginning of the universe. And when we get to humanity, because today we want to zoom a little bit on that, when we get to humanity, we start with what makes us all human. We start with the children by studying the fundamental human needs. And with this chart, we start very simply with connecting it with their own personal life. What what did you have for breakfast? Oh, bread. How do we make bread? Water. uh, and what about the rest? There is also some plant products that we're using. And then we can discuss with them how their own life shows what fundamental human needs are. There are the material fundamental needs, clothing, nourishment, etc., but also the spiritual one. And by doing that, we start to invite them to look at humanity as something universal, just like everybody in the world has the same fundamental human needs. And once we have done that, we can use these needs to study any people. It could be another culture of today, or it could be a civilization of the past. So we offer them, it's like if we offered them glasses so that they could see more clearly how we all are human. And what is interesting is, how are the Egyptians supporting their fundamental needs? And then suddenly differences become something about diversity and something rich and interesting about creativity. Oh, that's how they dealt with the heat. That's how they constructed the pyramids. That's how they made music. That's how they nurtured their spiritual life. And then again, that gives them a special key so that when they look at anybody or any civilization or any person they meet, they can understand this person a little bit more and understand as what by looking at similarities and looking at things that connects to them instead of looking at differences. Because in a traditional approach, we would say, okay, let's study this country. So how this country is different. They do this. Oh, okay, oh, that's different. I wouldn't do that. Oh, and they have this kind of food. Ooh, I wouldn't like to eat that. And oh, they dance this way. Oh, this is weird. Instead, we take the other perspective. We're looking at they're like us. They need to move, they need to dance, they need to express themselves, they need to eat. But in their country, they didn't have, let's say, apples. Well, so what did they eat as fruits? Oh, they ate this kind of fruits. Wow, interesting. So that is the very beginning of studying human civilization and humanity with children. We also do it through other things that we're going to see later that talks about the history of humanity and looking at how all the things that happened even before humanity, the evolution of life and all that, how all of this brought us to the world we have today, and how all this civilization have contributed to the beautiful and very convenient things not uh, do without anymore today. You're you're using internet right now. It's impossible to cite and list all the different civilization and people who participated in a way or another to make that internet possible. Even just using math, in the story of the math, in story of the numbers, we're going to show how there are so many civilizations everywhere that supported the human civilization to develop these numbers. Another thing that is also in cosmic education, but is not literally shown to children, are human tendencies. Human tendencies, it's It's an idea that was formalized by Mario Montessori, not by Maria Montessori. But Maria talks about them everywhere in her texts. In every one of her books, she would mention things that makes us human at all ages. Our tendency to orient ourselves, to observe, to manipulate, to use our imagination, to abstract, to create or to look for order, etc. So these human tendencies, again, show universal aspects of humanity. Every baby that is born anywhere in the world have these human tendencies, and they'll have it for their whole life. So how do we do that in cosmic education? There are countless. We invite or support the child to recognize human tendencies. And we're going to see a couple of materials, but just think about the stories we tell and how we tell them. You know the story of the coming of humans. We talk about the three gifts of human beings. The hands to work. So here we have already work, we have manipulation. The brain to think, to imagine and create new ideas, create new things. That is a lot of support to understand human tendencies. And the heart to love and to connect. So again, that's one example where we show them something that's universal for all human beings. And you can find in pretty much every story we tell, especially the stories about human beings and human civilization and human culture, you will find human tendencies in it. So without listing them to the children, we are helping children to recognize human qualities, human characteristics, so that when and that I'm talking for me, after my course, my first 6 to 12 course, it changed the way I was traveling. Because when I'm traveling somewhere and I see something that they're doing, and automatically my brain is going like human fundamental needs, human tendencies. Oh, wow, that's how they use their capacity of abstraction to create a very different kind of alphabet. Or this is how they express their mathematical mind. Or they had to orient themselves. And before the Western culture came, they had this system that's so interesting about orienting themselves, maybe using landscape elements. So having an understanding of what it means to be humans, again, help us connect with other cultures. That is, again, what we do to bring cultural awareness. Not just knowledge, awareness. And through again, connection. It's not just aware, oh yeah, I'm aware of that. Awareness in an almost spiritual way. This image is taken from the new timeline of human beings. And it shows again how we present to children the story of the human civilization in ways that the child can connect with. With this, we can recognize, with this image, for example, we can recognize fundamental human needs. The needs for beauty, the needs for aesthetics. We can talk about why they would do that on their face. Maybe there was some spiritual meaning to it. But you can see in the back also, they're coming back with some food, fish. that they have caught. And we can see they use tools. They use their imagination to create a tool that would help them realize something. And they have perfected these tools year after year. So we can again see human tendency of self-perfection. So when we tell the story of human civilization, again, we tell it at a unifying story, a story that shows how we are all human and how the human universal characteristics have brought us to where we are today. And that also brings us to the idea of human creative adaptation. Because these adaptations that we have done by working, by using our imagination, our abstraction, by orienting ourselves, by manipulating objects, all these adaptations that we have done were to fulfill our fundamental needs. But these ways, these adaptations had to be different depending on the environment. And that is this very special capacity of human beings to actually adapt to a specific environment and create innovative ways to live in places where it was not made for human, not made for human life. So human creative adaptation, and this again, this idea, when we use all of these origin stories, it's very important in Montessori, in cosmic education. When we use these origin stories, we can show them how the diversity of the world is the expression of the same humanity. That is very powerful, again, for developing a world citizenship. I understand that I am part of humanity, and the differences I see are fascinating for me. They're not frightening or making me be judgmental. They're fascinating because I'm like, oh, that's another way we have created things as human beings. And I want to try that. Just think about that example of that cultural misunderstanding that you had at the beginning. Cultural misunderstanding is not only because of a lack of knowledge, especially the consequences of cultural misunderstanding. Because yes, I can still sometimes misunderstand cultural elements, but the way I react to that, for example, if that misunderstanding creates judgment on my part, or if it creates fear, that's where separation comes in. But if that misunderstanding of or that difference creates curiosity for me, an interest, because I know there must be a connection with me there, then that's where cultural awareness brings unity and peace. There is this idea also that human beings have created a sum of knowledge. Montessori sometimes calls it the supramind, the collective knowledge of human civilization. And we present that to children in many ways. Again, through the origin stories, but also when we present every single aspect of human culture, we talk about who discovered that. Who discovered the tectonic plates? Who discovered the Pythagoras theorem? Who discovered the Indian number system? And also with this, our capacity to bring the world to the child and to allow the child to go to the world through going out, we again help the child understand of the richness and the luck we have to have access to this unlimited amount of knowledge in the world. And again, that brings back the idea of cultural awareness as being something that brings us together because it creates gratitude. I'm so grateful that they invented that so that I could have this life I have today. And then also, the way we present human history is through an idea of systems, an idea of interdependencies, of a web of interconnected things. That's the timeline of human beings is not presenting how different nations evolved separately. It shows how human civilization in general went from certain types of societies to other types of societies, what it changed so that they could adapt to fulfill their human fundamental needs. And how all of this story of the human civilization shows how we all follow the same tendencies, how we all have the same urges in life. And at the bottom, these are the cards for human interdependencies, where we also show inside a local society. How do we depend on each other? By looking at, okay, the bread, where does the bread come from? Okay, the bread needs water and also wheat. So the wheat, where does it come from? Etc., etc., all the way to the farmer. So looking at this human civilization, a system of interdependencies where we need each other. And that's on the local level, but we also, and that's the map you see on the right, we also study international and global exchanges, global trade. I like I like a lot this idea that we create this chart. That's for the older child. We create this chart of exchanges of our country with other countries, and then we use these two colors, blue and red. We don't tell the child, but for me, it's so beautiful to imagine this is like the human body with the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, the movement of nutrients, and the movement of things that every part of the body needs. It's like, again, offering them the opportunity to see how interdependent and how interconnected we are in the world as a human civilization. What better way to prepare the child to feel like a world citizen than to allow them to discover by themselves through their work, but with the help of some keys, to discover that we are actually one big, fascinating, almost organism. A little bit like, and Montessori makes this parallel, like a human body, where you have the blood that transports all the things that we need everywhere. That's like the global trade. But now we also have internet, who transports the knowledge, the information everywhere in the body, a little bit like the nervous system. So what is it that's not working today? Is that we may be an organism, but we believe we're not. It's like it's like cancer. It's here, and it believes it has to survive by taking over. Where actually we are a system that works together. We just need to recognize it, bring that awareness of our unity. So if Montessori would have used these words, cultural awareness, she would probably end her talk by talking about the unity of the world that already exists. We just need to raise our awareness of it. And who can do that? The child. We as adults, we have so many biases and prejudices. We can work on it, we can try to counteract them, but we grew up learning about the borders of our countries, the differences, and the wars of history, and all the things that separates us. Because that's how history is presented or was presented. And when we present history on a cosmic perspective, it's a completely different story. It's not that we avoid talking about wars or things like that, but this is not the lens we take to understand history. And that means we invite the child to look at history and to look at differences in human culture with interest and curiosity, not with fear. If you study human history by looking at every expression of deviances, if to use Montessori's words, if we look at history by looking at everything that happened wrong because of misunderstanding, because of a lack of education, because of what Montessori very simply describes for the child as, as deviations from our natural expression of humanity, then if we do that, if we present history in this distorted way, then necessarily when differences happen and when we're faced with differences, the first thing that comes to us is not curiosity and interest, it's fear. Because we have been constructing our understanding of human civilization on that base. It's all a question of perspective. So cultural awareness, I believe, needs to be built on that cosmic perspective if we want to build world citizen. I have a little quote here from Montessori. It's necessary to understand that every nation has its own task, and yet all of these tasks are part of a single work, the creation of a peaceful world. So again, think about what can we do in education to bring that idea? It's by, again, presenting what makes us all human, by presenting what is universal about being human, a human being. The other interesting thing I want to say before we go into a little more practical things is for Montessori, at some point she started observing children and see a spontaneous emergence of peace. She started seeing that children who had been supported adequately in every steps of their development, the children who had the right condition for life, for human development, then spontaneously would create what she calls a cohesive society. She started by observing that in the children's house, where they didn't teach the children to be nice to each other, but when the children were actually satisfied by their work, a work that was bringing their whole human personality into work, their body, their mind, and the power of their will, their spirit. Then after that, they were feeling joy, peace. And so what happened and what she could observe is that in these classrooms, the children were just naturally interacting peacefully with each other. In a way, we could say a peace in relationships starts with peace in ourselves. So children who would find peace in themselves because they find in the environment the activities that allows them to be what they're meant to be human, then peace happens. And this is a very, very important thing to think about. Because that means that in the human potential, when it's not deviated, there is a finality of peace. There is somehow a destination in human development which is peaceful. So again, we're going to prepare the environment. We're going to prepare activities and present activities to children so that they can satisfy their inner needs and their laws of development, natural laws. And if we do that, then they are interested in the world, curious. And they arrive in the second plane at the elementary level. And now they want to explore with their imagination, with abstraction. So in their relationship with people, in their understanding of morality, they're going to ask why. Why is that okay? Why is that good? Why is that bad? Because they are starting to explore with their reasoning mind. And through that work, they go to another level of their work of building peace. If in the children's house, that work was spontaneous, it was just a natural expression, just coming from the horme, from the fundamental energy of life that they have in them. In elementary, it starts to be accompanied with the reasoning mind. So yes, they are trying to build communities. They're experimenting in their classrooms. It's like a social laboratory. They're trying things, okay, what is it to be a leader? How do we do that? How am I a leader? Oh, I don't want to be a leader. So how can I follow someone without losing my own identity? All of this is the work of the elementary child. And when we offer the cosmic perspective on the world to this child, then this child who's doing this work of trying to figure out how to create human society and how to understand it, then we give them very special keys for them, very special interpretation keys, so that they could try to reproduce this idea of the cosmic and interdependencies in the way they create and make these experimentation. So that was for the maybe theoretical parts. Now let's look at more precisely, how do we do that in the classroom? Why we do some materials, why we do it in a certain way, and how this allows them not only to develop the cosmic perspective and cultural awareness, but also, that's this next subject, how do we allow them to express themselves? So expression needs knowledge. So we are going to offer that knowledge. It needs skills. We're going to show them how to do things. But it needs also their spirit. And that's where we're going to talk. Montessori talks about freedom, right? The importance of freedom, the capacity of making choices. How am I going to express myself? What kind of expression tools and media I'm going to use? So how do we create the conditions for expression? And here I use the title indirect preparation for expression, because again, if we tell them how to express themselves, then it's not authentic. It's not coming from their inner world. So what we want is to indirectly prepare so that they could at some point express themselves, and that expression will come from their inner world and not from our dictation. So how do we do that? First, we have this idea of freedom in time and space. We have this long, uninterrupted period of work because, especially when you're building expression skills, you need time. And you need the feeling of safety that I'm not going to be interrupted. When I compose music, I cannot do that if I know I have a meeting in half an hour. This is not going to work. So that is one very important part, having these long uninterrupted periods of work. And of course, the freedom of choosing the work, choosing how I want to do the work. The how is also very, very important and useful in terms of developing self-expression. Because if you get a presentation in geography, for example, there are so many ways you could work on that subject other than writing about it. A documentary, you could write a poem about it. That still could need some research before. You could write a song about it. You can write a melody. You could draw something. You could paint, sculpt. You could go out in society and meet an expert about it, ask questions, bring it back, present it to your friends. There's so many ways you can actually explore and then express yourself. So freedom in time and space. Open-ended follow-up, the same idea. But you know, it's I said, like, if you want to express yourself, you need the knowledge, yes, so the presentation in this example, but you also need the skills. So you want to have in your classroom presentations for skills in arts, skills in music, skills in creative writing. And you want these skills to be very isolated, not into like projects. Because if the only times you do arts in your classroom is with projects, then um, skills that they could then combine with their own personality and create something new. You're actually telling them how to make a landscape or how to make a heart by gluing pieces of paper together, or how to make a mosaic of a giraffe. Sometimes, I mean, if you're a teacher in elementary, you know what I mean. You show them an example, and then half of the classroom is doing the same exact thing you just did in the presentation, right? That may lead later to expression, but that is not their expression at the moment. So it's this idea of key lessons. I'll come back to that later. An inspiring environment, and in elementary, that means a lot of storytelling. It's also art materials that are available to them, and that you have given presentations on how to use them and what kind of techniques they can use. It's an environment that's beautiful and that feel peaceful, welcome, where there is order, because even in art, order in the mind allows more creativity. It's not because a piece of art looks disorderly that the mind of the person who made it was disorderly. The expression part is very unique. It comes from your inner world. But if you have an organized and ordered environment, it helps because it empowers you and it makes you feel you can do it. It makes you see all the options and what you can do with it. Cultural richness comes a lot through storytelling. It's about also just giving just the techniques, just enough, and not an example that is too precise, so that the children are inspired to create instead of inspired to imitate. And I'm not saying imitation, like copying, is bad. I mean, a lot of very important artists in history have been amazing copies before. They were just copying pieces of art, and that's how they learned. I'm not saying it's a wrong way to learn arts. I'm just saying this is not it's not the way that is gonna allow the creativity part of it. It may help with the technique, but the creativity of it is different. So, and if you show them very specific skills, I'll give you an example. If you give a presentation in watercolors, and in your presentation, instead of showing them, oh, I'm going to show you how to do watercolors, let's do a landscape. And then you show them, and then what are the children going to do after the presentation? Most of them. They're going to do a landscape. And many of them are going to do the same landscape that you did. Instead, my first presentation of watercolors is about connecting with science. So these pigments are actually a suspension. They had a presentation in geography about suspension. And then when I place that suspension on paper, then the water evaporates and it leaves the pigments on the paper. And then I show how I do that so that it creates an interesting line that gets larger and less large. And that's the end of my first presentation in watercolors. And if you wonder, do children do with something with that presentation after? Oh, yes, so much things. And because the presentation itself is not a final product, you're going to have as many final products as you have children doing work from that presentation. Yes, some of them will make landscapes. Some of them will make very contrasted kinds of drawing with the watercolors. Some others will just place random colors in it and they find it beautiful. But each of them is actually using the basic techniques of watercolors, the basic idea of it, but they are expressing themselves. And you can see that. You can see almost their personalities. You can say, oh, okay, this child here definitely is fascinated about colors, shapes, not that much, but colors. And they're just trying to figure out what colors would be nice together. And this other child is just doing flowers and flowers and flowers and flowers. That is expression. So it's about giving support, giving them skills, giving them a specific understanding so that they can use it creatively and connect with other things they know and then do things. So it's about empowering them. It's that indirect preparation for expression. And imagination, again, is going to be very easy to invite them to use their imagination as a catalyst, as a motivation also. They're going to use the tools you gave them in terms of expression, whether it's music, arts, or written expression, dance, movement, drama, they're going to use that when they're inspired by a subject. The other thing you want also is to give a lot of diversity, a lot of different forms of expression, all kinds of ways to express yourself, whether it's drawing, painting, writing, illuminating your writings, dancing, making choreographies, inventing a play, expressing ourselves as like a speech, all different kinds of expression, of modes of expression. Because every child will find something different that was going to talk to them. They're going to experiment with all the things you present. But you know, this child maybe will be very intensely connected with expressing themselves through drama. And that other child, not at all. But this other child could spend hours just weaving and making this colorful piece of cloth. So diversity is important. Visual, verbal, mathematical, musical, physical, social, whatever kind of expression, you want to give a little bit of everything to make sure that you can give them the skills, but also give them the idea that this is one way you can express yourselves. And by doing this, you can allow children to find their voice. Think about yourself and the people you love around you. Each of them, each of us, have a different way to express ourselves. And some ways feel more comfortable for us, some ways less. Some way we feel more confident and skilled, some others less. So that's how it's so important, why it's so important with the children in elementary to give them all these skills and these options so that they can find how they're going to express themselves. And this way, expression is going to be, we could say, authentic, which means when they are feeling that they have the capacity, when they're feeling that they have the right and the space and the time to express themselves, then it's going to come. Which means also that expression in the classroom, we should make sure that we're not connecting expression with a question of performance or exactitude always. It's not about the outcomes. Expression is not about the outcomes. It's about the expression itself. Even in terms of emotions, you know how like half of the work is done when you have finally been able to express what you feel. Even if it doesn't change anything, just expressing it is always the solving half of the problem for yourself. So expression in itself is important. It shouldn't be linked systematically to the outcome. Like if every single piece of work is being read and evaluated, for example, then we lose that motivation in some children because they didn't do that to get your approval. They did that to express themselves. And you can see that sometimes in the classroom, the children who are not used to that, they're gonna look for your approval. They come and they show you drawings and say, hey, do you like it? Because they've been taught their whole life that the value of their work comes from the judgment of someone else. And if you work mindfully, day after day, weeks after weeks, month after month, by the way you're going to answer these questions, by developing what Carol Dweck's called the mindset, the growth mindset, which is valuing the work and the expression more than the result. Then slowly, and I can tell you by experience, slowly children will stop asking you this kind of questions. And they will come with other things. For example, I remember one child, she arrived in my classroom, 6 years old, and she would show me what she does and say, do you like it? Is it beautiful? And I just had that workshop the year before about the growth mindset. And I was like, oh, interesting, look at that. You have used shapes to make the animal. The first times they're looking at you like, this is weird. Why is he saying that? Okay. But then they get used to it and then they start developing that idea that let's look at what it is instead of just looking for the adult's judgment. Okay. And then at some point, either they don't come because they don't need that validation anymore, or I remember that same child who came, it was several months later, but she came and said, look at my drawing. Here I use the technique of gradation. She was already starting to gradually go towards being able to appreciate her own work and not with like a final evaluation, but with actually appreciating the work. Again, support, don't shape. We cannot make artists. We cannot create an artist. An artist is creating itself. It connects very well with what Montessori talks about, self-construction. We don't create the child or we don't create intelligence in the child. The child creates it. And similarly, an artist or expression is created by the child. Our work is not to tell them how to express themselves. Our work is to give them the tools and the inspiration, and then they are going to create. And that's, again, how we can honor who they are, really. Think about the music again. We're not teaching them to play specific songs, but we are showing them what music means. And we are giving them experience with music, starting with very simple activities and showing them that they can. The tone bars. You place the major scale, and you take your mallet and you start doing it. It's like, oh, I'm composing music. And it sounds good because I'm playing on a major scale, but that's something I'll learn later. But right now, I just got confidence. I can do music. And then slowly we go further into abstraction because that's the elementary child. And then they start connecting things. And when they actually play music from someone else, then that's with the understanding or with the experience of what music is. It doesn't start with reading. In the same way in language, we don't start with reading because that means accessing the thoughts of someone else. This is much more abstract. We start with writing. That's expressing my own thoughts. So when I know how to express myself, then I can access the thoughts of someone else. So I can compose music before I can read music. I can write with the mobile alphabet before I can read. So expression, we create the conditions for expression. Which means we give key lessons and allow for independent exploration. We just give the keys to the world. Intellectual tools to open the understanding. We give materials so that they can actually continue the work without the adult. Building confidence, building understanding for myself, so that at some point I can use that to create something. And that is a form of expression, even in math and geometry. Independent exploration, collaboration, and meaning making. Elementary child is always talking, and sometimes that's a misunderstood thing. It's like, oh, the elementary classroom is so chaotic. And that's frequently an observation that 3 to 6 guides do of elementary. It's like, oh, this is crazy. They're not normalized children. They're talking all the time. This is the elementary child. If you go in an elementary classroom and nobody's talking, there's something wrong. There's some things that, I mean, it happens. I'm not saying it happens a couple of times in my 17 years. I remember, like, it's silence in the classroom. It happens, but it usually doesn't. There are blah, 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 expressing themselves all the time. It's part of their social sensitivity. And they're also talking a lot about good things and bad things because that's what they want to know. Oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you're my friend. You're not my friend. Why did you do this? Etc. That's who they are. And that's their work. They need to explore these. But also in the work, they like that much more to do work where they can actually discuss the meaning with their friends. That's why usually we invite children in small groups for the presentations. And presentation in elementary are much more with expression. There's much more discussion and children are participating, etc. I like this one. Culture and imagination cannot be imposed. They must grow from the deeper needs of life itself. I mean, this is very interesting when you think about cultural awareness. You cannot teach culture like that. It needs to come from them. And how do we do that? By offering all the keys and the tools so that they can actually learn and discover culture. It comes from their own characteristics and their own needs. So some practical tools and materials that we use. I talked about the fundamental human needs charts. There are actually two, this one and one that is more specifically about food, nourishment. In this universal human needs material, there is also the history cards, where instead of studying one civilization, we take one need, for example, and then we see how it evolved throughout time. So in this example, how did lighting evolved from making a fire all the way to the LED lighting. And this again, always with this perspective of the human beings had these human tendencies and these human fundamental needs. And how did they use their creativity to find solutions? So these are all cultural responses from that time and place where that happens. So it's again another key to cultural awareness, to understand that any aspect of culture is a specific way of answering these universal human characteristics. You have also all the origin stories and the great lessons. I talked about this already, like this, the timeline of life, all the timelines. That also brings this this perspective as culture as being the expression of the same humanity. In the question of timelines is how this evolved throughout time. The black ribbon. I mean, again, here we end the story and we look at this small red line, and this is the length of the human beings have existed. And this very long line is all the time that has passed since the formation of the crust of the planet. So can you imagine how unifying that feels? Every human that exists today and that have existed in the past, all of them are represented in this small little red line at the end of the story of our planet. When we tell the story of the alphabet and the story of the numbers, again, think about the story of the numbers, for example. Our numbers, the one we use, are actually the graphic representation of our numbers. They were first invented in India. And then there was an Arabic scientist, Al-Khwarizmi, who found them fascinating, and he wrote a little book about the Indian numbers. If he hadn't done that, we may not be using these ones today. And then this little book traveled the world and ended up in Italy, where there are some monks who found it and thought it was a great idea, much easier to use than the Roman numbers and the abacus. And then with the invention of the press, it became standardized, and that's how we have the numbers we have today. How many civilizations can we be grateful for that? Again, that's another bridge with other civilization. If I look at the news, how different is my perspective on the Arabic world, for example, than with this perspective of the story of numbers? So that is very important to remember, that the way we present all of these origin stories should be one way we use to bring cultures and differences in the lens of how we are all connected and how we all are interdependent. The question charts in history, it's interesting if you look at them, if you read the questions that are in them, you're going to recognize a lot of human tendencies. Again, it's not written like as it is, a lot of human tendencies in it. Orientation, exploration, language and communication. So what do we do with this chart? We invite the child to use these keys to study other civilization. Again, to allow them to see that all civilizations do the same things. They all find ways to use the land where they are, to feed themselves. They all find ways to educate their children. They all find ways to um, um, satisfy their spiritual needs. So again, it's another key we give them, maybe more abstract for the older child, to look at civilization, human civilization and human culture with a lens that shows our similarities and our commodities. The storytelling, and not only the great stories, we have stories everywhere, including in arts and music, where we talk about local culture and global culture, and each time we can connect with the human fundamental needs and the human tendencies. Each time. If you write your own cosmic stories, just think about, and when you're done, just think about the human tendencies and look at your story. Where can you make that pattern emerge in your story? There's always a way, because if the story is about human beings, you're gonna find human tendencies. And real world experiences, going out. Well, if you really want to be aware of the society where you live in, you need to have experience in that society. And that is the job of the second plane child. They need to go out of the classroom. They need to go out of the house. They need to be allowed to go and buy some things they need for their work, to go in nature, gather some specimens, or just be in nature. They need to be able to go in the local university and ask questions to a specialist. And they will get much more than just the answers of the specialist. They will get inspiration of real heroes. They will get so many things on the way to university, like, oh, I take the bus. Oh, and how do I do that? I need money. Oh, money is a very, very important part of society. And where do I find the money? And how do I buy the thing? And how do I interact with the bus driver, etc.? And how do I use a map to go there? They need that experience to, again, bring more awareness about society. Not only in the classroom, because this child has no limit. Like the universe is the limit. So if you keep them in the classroom, they may get the mind, maybe they get the skills, but they don't get the spirit. They don't get the actual experience. So it's not an integrated human experience. In the same way, if you do a training, and if this training only calls to your intellect and doesn't ask you to act on it, you're gonna get much less from this experience. If you have absolutely no freedom of expression in your training, then you only have skills and intellect. It's still not entirely you. It's still not an entire human experience. So you can see that for children it's the same. They cannot just learn at school. They need to get out. I like this one. The child who has felt a strong love for the environment and for all living beings gives us reason to hope that humanity can develop in a new direction. In other words, with a strong, interconnected cultural awareness, we're preparing a very different world for tomorrow. So what kind of skills and attitudes do we develop when we do that? Cohesive, social skills, capacity for empathy and respect because we understand our what connects us. We understand what makes us human. So I can respect the difference. I can understand you better if I understand what it is to be human. Gratitude. We cannot ask children to be grateful, right? That's something that comes from inside. But when you do this, you offer them this perspective on the world, then that's what comes naturally. It's like, wow, I'm so lucky to live today. I'm so lucky that all these people and civilization have done this amazing work before, so I can have this life. This stewardship, so a sense of care, responsibility, because when you understand that everything in the universe has to play its role if we want the universe and the planet Earth and the ecosystems to work, we need the phytoplankton to continue making oxygen. Please, everyone needs to do its job so that it works. When that is the basis of your intelligence, because everything is presented to you like that, then your intelligence is gonna create a world, create a relationship with people that aligns with this understanding of reality. Interest and open-mindedness. Again, we're not looking at differences as something that creates fear or that creates judgment. Differences creates interest. It's like, how do you do that? Why do you do that? How does that help you? How is it connected to your motivation, your tendency to communicate? That is how we want to have, that's the mindset we want to have when we meet people, right? When we meet differences. And finally, creativity and expression. You know, to be creative again, you need the knowledge. Yes. You also need the skills. Yes. But you also need to feel safe, to feel that you belong, then you can express. Just think more basically, if you are in a group of people, what will make you comfortable expressing yourself? First, you need to have knowledge, something you have to say, right? You need skills. If you're surrounded with people who speaks another language and you can't speak, you don't have the skills. Okay, so you need skills too. But you also need to feel a connection, to feel safe with the people. So for the children, how can they be really expressing themselves? If they have knowledge and skills, but also if they feel that they're part of this. They're part of this adventure, part of this community in your classroom, but also part of humanity. That confidence and that awareness of the interdependent world, that is also participating to expression. And the freedom, of course. The freedom of expression. As a conclusion, and I am so on time. As a conclusion, I have two little quotes here, and I don't know if we can call that a conclusion. I think we're not gonna conclude this subject before a couple of centuries, but just as some ideas for reflections and how we can think about cultural awareness differently in our classrooms and in our lives. The child does not just want to imitate, but to construct his own personality through work. And in doing so, he expresses what is hidden within. There is a lot in this quote. I would prefer not talking about it because you can just take it and figure out all the layers that are in this quote. And the second one, when the child is given the means to express himself and live in harmony with others, then we find roots for peace. That concludes for today. And I don't know if do we have time for some questions, Plamena?
First of all, thank you. It was delightful. And I really liked something that I would like to repeat and echo. It's that our tribe today is the whole world. That's how you said somewhere in the beginning. Um, we would like to we have a couple of minutes. We have 5 6 minutes. We would like to encourage our colleagues and friends who are here. They can unmute and ask questions, of course. They can also ask their questions in the chat, and we will be transferring to them. You have received many thank yous and beautiful words in the chat. I'll make sure that you receive them meanwhile.
Thank you.
And there is one very good question from Jackie. How do we cultivate more kindness?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's another webinar.
Okay.
I don't even know if I have the answer. I think I'm gonna play with your question a little bit. How do we cultivate kindness? Well, the choice of word is interesting. Cultivate. When you cultivate a plant, you you need a seed, and you're not creating the seed, right? So you put that seed, and then you create some conditions so that seed can grow up, right? So if you transfer that to education, I believe children have kindness, and it's part of their potential. So what we do is create conditions the life, so that life can strive for that child. Okay. So that is the theoretical answer to that. More practically, if you ask this question as a guide working with elementary children, it's a very tricky question because kindness is part of a very fundamental, it's a very fundamental part of the personality, I believe. And it's something that can already, and Montessori has seen emerge in the first plane. Okay? Kindness as being a spontaneous emergence in the cohesive society, for example, in the children's house. So if you have a child in elementary who doesn't have kindness, then you have to um, understand it also as something that comes from the experience of that child throughout his first plane, through the experiences the child had in the family, in society, in the school, etc. And that's already done, so you don't have any control on that. And sometimes we like to analyze and try to find all the reasons for that, but I don't think that's very helpful for you to find out why the child is like that. What's interesting is what can you do now? And Montessori's answer would be just find out what is the best conditions for that child. So observe, and in your observation, try to be factual and scientific, because with children who have challenges, we tend to come in our observations with biases. So try to put that aside and really observe factually what is happening. And then maybe you're going to see some expressions of humanity as an expression of human tendencies, expression of human qualities in the day. Then you can start with this. Instead of starting with the problem, start with what's right, what does work. And then, okay, what do we do with this? Oh, this child is interested in this subject. Okay, we go with the knowledge, with the intellect, sure. That's an interest. And then maybe you're gonna observe, interesting, this child is connecting well with this other child who has this kind of personality. How can I support that? And then when the child develops skills in the places where the child feels comfortable and already confident, then that confidence can help the child in the places where it's a little less easy. So, like many things, there is no recipe. I can't tell you just do that and it's gonna work. That would be nice, but that's not how human beings work. But I think that's what the Montessori is offering us in terms of perspective in education. Instead of focusing on what is not right, just try to observe factual things and observe humanity and its expression. And from there, try the reflective practice. Okay, observe this. Let's discuss that with my colleagues. What if we try this? And you try it and you go back to observation. Did that make any difference? Is there something improving? Yes, no? Okay, go back to discussion, reflection, implement something, and then go back to observation. That is, if there is one answer that would always be the answer, it's go back to the basics, the reflective practice, and your understanding of human development and of human tendencies. And with that, you may find some ideas in your work.